Hello, this is Sondra Oster Baras bringing you a few words of Bible from the heart of Biblical Israel. This week's Torah portion is Behar, and Behar literally means on the mountain. And it is because in the very first verse, in chapter 25, the very first verse, we read as follows: The Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai. Now, this opening of this chapter is actually unusual, because if we go to the very beginning of Leviticus, and we're now, of course, towards the end of Leviticus, at the very beginning of Leviticus, we have God calling to Moses from the temple of meeting, the tent of meeting. The first verse of Leviticus: the Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. Now, if we go back to Exodus, in the period of time before the tabernacle is completed, we have God speaking to Moses from Mount Sinai. We have the revelation of Mount Sinai, and we have chapters. For example, in chapter 23, 24, 21, all these chapters that are immediately follow the revelation at Sinai. This is the continuation of God giving many, many different commandments to Moses, even as he is up there on Mount Sinai. So that's fine. Then he comes down from Mount Sinai and they build the tabernacle. And when we get to the beginning of Leviticus, the site of God's conversation with Moses changes to being from the tent of meeting. And yet, here we are at chapter 25 in Leviticus, we suddenly kind of hark back to Mount Sinai. So it's clear that this chapter doesn't really belong here, okay? Because if Moses is already not on Mount Sinai, he came down from Mount Sinai in Exodus. Why here do we have a whole chapter that begins, and it actually takes us through parts of next week's Torah portion, the last verse of chapter 26. So we have two chapters, essentially, chapter 25 and chapter 26, that are given on Mount Sinai. The very end, the last verse of chapter 26 reads, "These are the laws, rules, and instructions that the Lord established through Moses on Mount Sinai between himself and the Israelite people." So, there's different commentaries. So there's one approach that says, actually, these are written in order, that they are not actually given to Moses on Mount Sinai, but they're kind of a development of what was said to Moses on Mount Sinai. So we have this tradition that in addition to the various specific commandments that were given to Moses on Mount Sinai, that God transmitted to Moses all kinds of additional understandings, oral traditions that were passed down from Moses. In many cases, perhaps a greater detail, understanding of things that he actually said, etc. And so one interpretation is that these are part of these additional details that were said to Moses on Mount Sinai, together with all the written things that we already have. But it's really part of, all of these rules that Moses gives is all connected in some way to Mount Sinai. It's basically saying that the source of the law is Mount Sinai. Whether God spoke these particular details to Moses in the tent of meeting, whether he said them to him separately on Mount Sinai as understandings and he passed it on later as oral traditions, or whatever, this kind of says all of these laws are grounded in Mount Sinai. So that's a very nice idea, and it's very possible, but it's not exactly what it says. Okay, the verse itself indicates that these are commandments that were actually spoken to Moses on Mount Sinai, and they're written here instead of being written in Exodus. So I think that indeed these two chapters really belong in Exodus. That's where they belong chronologically, but they were actually put here in Leviticus. So if they're put here in Leviticus, there has to be a reason. Okay. Now, if we notice in chapter 26, we have a covenant. And next week, I'm going to discuss what that covenant is and where that belongs. But there's no question there's mention of this covenant in Exodus itself, and this is the details of the covenant. The text of the covenant is not mentioned in Exodus. It's just, it just says they had a covenant. So again, that just reinforces the question: why do we have it written here in Leviticus as opposed to there in Exodus? Well, if we look particularly in chapter 25, what is the main subject that we are dealing with here? This is all about the Sabbatical year and the Jubilee year, and all the rules that have to do with this. And of course, as a basic premise, we have a 7-year cycle, and we work the land for 6 years, and in the 7th year we let it rest. And then after a cycle of 7 of those 7 years, we have a Jubilee year in the 50th year. And then we also have a lot of what we would call social justice being, social injustices being redressed. Slaves will go free. Land that was sold from one to another under the assumption that there was financial distress, and so someone had to sell part of his ancestral heritage to somebody else, it will go back to the original family. So we have this idea of on the one hand, how do we need to care for the land? And if we act in faith in the land, we will indeed not only survive but prosper. We have this idea that if we will be careful and we don't work the land in the 7th year, we will still gain the blessings of that 7 years. We will not suffer from it. And so all of these rules are very, very much connected with the land of Israel and the way we relate to the land of Israel, and particularly in the agricultural area. And the truth of the matter is, at Revelation in Mount Sinai, they don't know anything about the land of Israel. It's all very new. They know there's a promised land. They are going to go back to it. But you can imagine that this is, this is an amazing event. And so certainly for them, I'm assuming it would have been probably more difficult for them to undertake and appreciate all these details. But if they're there in the grandeur of the moment of Revelation and just after, you can imagine that it doesn't really matter that much to them. They're just taking it all in as, oh, wow, the land of Israel, and we have to act in a certain way. But for us, so many centuries later, it is very important for us to properly understand these laws of the Sabbatical year, these laws of Israel and the land of Israel, that we have preparation for that. And if we see all throughout Leviticus, the beginning of Leviticus talks about sacrifices, but then we go into all kinds of laws of ritual purity. We go into laws of different kinds of animals. We also have a great deal of laws of how we treat our neighbor, how to establish a just society. And in fact, just a few chapters ago, we have laws, for example, of when you harvest your field, you leave the edges for the poor so that they can come and gather the stuff that you were not able to gather, or that you leave for them on purpose. And so you have, coming up until this point, many, many laws that help the nation or help us understand how to establish a just society in the land of Israel, from the laws of purity to the laws of temple to the laws of the land itself. And then at that point, we are better able to appreciate what is this sabbatical year, because in the sabbatical year, everything is combined. This idea of holiness, which has been tremendously discussed in many ways prior to this in the book of Leviticus, the idea of holiness, the idea of faith, the idea of the connection to the land through various obligations. And therefore, I believe that even though the covenant and these few instructions beforehand were actually given on Mount Sinai, for us in later generations who are reading the Bible, who are not there at Revelation, it's very important for us to be taking this in its proper order so that we can better appreciate and understand what it is that chapter 25 and 26 is trying to tell us. Have a wonderful weekend. Shabbat Shalom.
I hope you enjoyed that video, and we'd like to be sure you're getting all of our video content. So just click on the subscribe button below, as well as on the notification bell, and that way you will have easy access to all our material. We look forward to staying in touch with you. God bless you, and have a wonderful day.